Danny Krueger terrorized our town for 3 years. Then one October night in 1971, he was just gone. And nobody ever really talked about what happened to him. I grew up in a town called Riverside, population around 5,000. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business, where you couldn't sneeze without 3 people asking if you were sick. But there was one thing that nobody talked about openly, one thing that stayed quiet, and that was Danny Krueger. Back then I was maybe 17, 18 years old, still in high school, and Danny was a couple years older, probably 20 or 21, but he'd never left town, never went to college, just kind of existed in this space between kid and adult, and used that space to make life miserable for people. I still can't believe nobody did anything about it sooner. Danny came from money, which was part of the problem. His dad owned the big lumber mill on the edge of town, so the police didn't really mess with him. If you complained about Danny, it got back to his father, and his father would call the police chief, and suddenly the complaint got buried. That's how it worked back then. Money protected you. Money got you away with things. And Danny used that protection to be absolutely vicious. He'd corner kids after school and take their lunch money. He'd throw rocks at cars just to watch people freak out. One time he beat up this kid named Marcus so bad that Marcus had to go to the hospital. And nobody did anything. The police came, took a report, and then mysteriously closed the case. Nobody was ever charged. I remember being terrified of Danny Krueger. Absolutely terrified. I'd change my route home from school to avoid walking past his usual hangout spot. I'd make sure I was never alone. I'd see him coming, and I'd literally cross the street. We all did. Every kid in town learned early on that Danny Krueger was someone you didn't mess with. The thing was, Danny wasn't stupid. He was actually pretty smart. But he was cruel in a way that seemed almost calculated. Like he enjoyed hurting people. Like he'd gotten a taste of power. The power that came from being bigger and stronger and not having to answer for anything. And he just wanted more and more of it. He'd started dealing drugs, too, or so the rumors went. Nothing crazy. This was a small town in the 70s. But enough that sketchy people started coming through town to see him. There'd be cars pulling up at weird hours, bags being exchanged. Everybody knew what was happening, but again, nobody said anything. My mom warned me about him constantly. Stay away from Danny Krueger, she'd say. That boy's headed for trouble. And she was right. But the trouble he was headed for, we all thought, was prison or a bad end somewhere down the line. Not what actually happened. It was early October. I remember because the leaves were just starting to turn. There was this chill in the air that made you want to stay inside. And that's when Danny just vanished. Not in a dramatic way. He didn't disappear in the middle of the day or anything. He was just gone. One day he was around. I'd seen him at the diner the day before, and the next day nobody could find him. At first, I think people thought he'd just left town, gone off to do something stupid somewhere else. But then days turned into weeks, and nobody heard from him. His parents filed a missing person report. The police actually did some investigating, which was surprising. His mother gave a press conference asking for information. It was in the local paper. But here's the thing, and this is what I've never fully understood. Nobody seemed that concerned. There was no big search, no volunteers organizing to look for him, no vigils. People just kind of accepted that he was gone. And then the rumors started. I remember hearing them in the hallways at school, in the parking lot, at the diner. Different versions, but all basically saying the same thing. Danny Krueger had gotten into some kind of deal that went bad. He'd ripped off the wrong people. He'd done something stupid, and those people had come and taken care of him. Some people said he'd been dumped in the river. Some said he was buried out in the woods somewhere. Some said he'd run off and was living under a fake name in some other state. Nobody knew for sure, but everybody seemed to have a theory. My best friend at the time was this kid named Jerry, and he swore he knew what happened. Said his older brother had told him that Danny had gotten mixed up with some motorcycle gang from the city, and they'd come to collect on a debt, and Danny couldn't pay. Said they'd taken him out to the old quarry and, well, he wouldn't say exactly what they'd done, but his implication was pretty clear. I don't know if that was true. Jerry's older brother was kind of full of it. But that was the thing about what happened to Danny. There was no official story, no resolution, just speculation and whispers, and everybody kind of agreeing not to talk about it too loudly. The police investigated for a while. I remember seeing officers around town, asking questions. But after a couple months, it seemed like they gave up. No body was ever found. No arrests were ever made. Danny Krueger just became this ghost story that people told. A cautionary tale about what happened to bullies in small towns. What's strange is how quickly people moved on. By the time I graduated high school a couple years later, Danny was barely mentioned anymore. There were new scandals, new dramas. Life went on. His parents stayed in town. His mother would sometimes be seen at the grocery store, looking older and sadder than she had before. But nobody really talked to her about it. It was like people had collectively decided to forget about Danny Krueger. I think about that now, all these years later. I think about whether Danny Krueger is actually dead, or whether he ran off and became someone else. I think about his parents and what it must be like to have a child just vanish and never know what happened. I think about all those rumors and whether any of them were true. But mostly, I think about how weird it was that a whole town just kind of accepted it. That a kid, because he was still just a kid, even if he was a terrible one, just disappeared, and we all just moved on. I'm not saying Danny didn't deserve consequences. I'm not saying he didn't do bad things. I'm saying that in a just world, those things would have been dealt with through actual justice, through courts and law enforcement and real consequences, not through whatever happened that October night. Because here's what I learned. When you allow one person to operate outside the law, when you protect them with money and silence, eventually something breaks. And usually it breaks in a way that nobody planned for, that nobody wants to acknowledge. Danny Krueger was a bully. He was a criminal. He hurt people. But he was also someone's son. And one day he was just gone. And we all pretended not to know anything. And we got on with our lives. I don't know what happened to him. Nobody really does. But I think about him sometimes, especially when I see kids now being cruel. And I wonder if we're letting the same thing happen all over again. If we're all just accepting it because it's easier than doing something about it. Sometimes the most haunting mysteries aren't the ones that get solved. They're the ones that get forgotten. The ones where everybody knows something happened, but nobody wants to talk about it. Danny Krueger disappeared in 1971. He's probably dead. He might be alive somewhere, but either way, he's gone, and his town moved on without him. That says something. I'm still not sure what.